Me a few got a goal kicking points this week. I don't know how many goals Chris kicked in his career, but a couple of pointers and it worked.
Welcome back to Talking Footy. There's our special guest, Chris Scott. Great to have the premiership coach of the Cats with us. Bit of goal kicking practice for Danger, was there?
Oh, a few little pointers. For such a good play, gee, he had a poor technique. It's taken me three years to work it out. But no, he... Well, credit where it's due. Thanks, Paddy. It's rare for him.
But, hey, before we get on to the cat stuff, I know you were watching before. Are you confused now with this new interpretation? It's not the umpire's fault. Clearly, they've been given the instruction to pay free kicks, but forcible knocks, clenched fist to the chest. So are you confused by what happened on the weekend? Or did the umpires get those ones right and the Luke Hodge and 5,822 other ones wrong?
Yeah, well, I think the last bit's probably closer to the truth. I mean, mistakes will happen every week, and I think we've got to be a little bit careful not to overreact when there are mistakes, and it's a little bit unfair to compare, two situations and say, well, which one's right. Every situation's sort of slightly different. I feel a little clearer, and I think our players feel clearer because the umpires have gone to great lengths to explain to us the change, and effectively... And I think Tim made the point earlier that the industry is saying we don't want players off the ball being hit in the back. We don't want any sort of fists at all. I'm not saying that's what those incidents were, but in the evolution to try to take that stuff out, I think there are going to be some free kicks that no one would like to see paid. And as we were saying, I mean, it's difficult for, especially the guys that played the game 20 years ago, to look at that and think that that's where the game should be. I think the game's changed and the responsibility's with us to move.
I agree with you though. I'm not stuck in the 90s. I agree with you. I think those forcible knocks when a player's not looking and punches in the chest, and we saw what happened with Gaff. Didn't mean to hit him in the jaw, but that he should have been suspended for that. And I agree with all of that. But this isn't that. I mean, this is just a little bit of push and shove, and I mean, you should be able to make contact. We play a contact sport. You're allowed to jump into someone's back with your knees, but you're not allowed to give them a little push in the chest with no forcible. I mean, it's been an overcorrection, and I hope this week that they don't make those sorts of mistakes because it'll cost you a game. I guarantee you won't be as diplomatic as you are right now.
Well, I think you're right, and that will probably be the case if we're in that situation. It's difficult to maintain perspective, but that's the challenge that we're trying to live up to. And I think your language was correct. It's a bit of an overcorrection, and I think it will find its right place.
Are the coaches the right people to consult about the games? Can you guys actually be impartial about the good of the game when you're in a role where your life depends on winning and losing? Are you the right guys to talk to about it?
I think we're biased, and I think we should acknowledge that bias. I think, and I've said this publicly quite a few times, it's a personal view. I know it's shared by some others, that the coaches appreciate being consulted on the rules, especially when the questions are framed around what the potential flow-on effects will be. And I've used the example before when the AFL was thinking about changing the deliberate rush behind rule and throwing the ball up 15 metres out. And I think it was Neil Craig that said to them, you could do that, but we'll just flood. And the AFL said, oh, OK, yeah, we won't do that. But in terms of trying to shape the rules or have a say on what rules should come in and which ones shouldn't, we're too governed by self-interest to have too big a role in it, in my view.
Are you happy with the 666 and the kick-in rules, the big changes that were made?
Well, it depends which perspective you're looking at. I think from a coaching perspective, it makes it... Scott Pendlebury summed it up really well post our round one game. He said, late in the game, when they got a goal up, he thought it was a terrible rule. And then we were a goal up and he thought it was a fantastic rule. So it just depends on where you're coming from. As a coach, it ties one hand behind your back to an extent. I don't think the kick-in rule has had a big issue, but the centre bounce rule has clearly changed the game. Harder for coaches. I think for the fans, it's undeniably better. And I do struggle to separate those two things. And again, we should look at it from the perspective that, OK, what does this mean for Geelong? So my view, to be honest, I wouldn't worry too much about what I think about it.
We were told that we were going to get more goals, though. Is that going to be the case, or do you think scoring will stay pretty much the same?
I didn't hear it that way. I thought they were talking about the game being more open, and I think a lot of people extrapolated that to higher scoring. I was never of the view that we needed more scoring for better games. I think some of the most gripping games that I've ever seen have been on the lower end of the scoring spectrum. So, yeah, I wouldn't be judging it just on scores for.
Your ability at Geelong to bring kids in, and Henry, Clark, Constable's the NAB Rising Star this week, to bring kids in, is that, and they perform straight away, straight to the level, is that based around the fact that you've got obviously Selwood and Dangerfield and these leaders? Do they develop quicker? Is there a reason why they develop quicker than sides that maybe don't have that real strong leadership?
Oh, it's so multifaceted. We've got a lot of faith in our development program down at the Cats. I think we've shown a really strong willingness over a long period of time to give them opportunity. And that's just not the players that we've got through the draft. And, you know, we haven't had a lot of early picks over the last decade,
which is
probably.
to my point.
Yeah, that's right. But we have, one, we've shown, I think that our academy has shown that they can develop those players. But two, we've said to those players, if you're going well enough, we will play you. But it's not just the players through the draft. We've now got a very strong history of bringing players through our VFL team. And the pathway is quite clear. There's a number of them that I could point to that have been overlooked in drafts but have found their way into our AFL team via our VFL system.
Luke Dalhouse is not one of those kids, but he's been really good for you in the first 2 rounds of this year. At what stage last year did you target him in terms of a player like that you needed in your forward line? Oh,
pretty early. Pretty early. And we've been on the lookout for that sort of player for quite some time. Yeah. It's been at least a 5 or 6 year period, so not just the last couple of years, longer than that we haven't had any continuity with our forward group. Tom Hawkins has been the mainstay there, and we have had a lot of inexperience in our group. Consistently last year we played, you know, half the team who were very inexperienced, you know, under 20 games, and the majority of them were concentrated in our forward group. And then so there was a point at which we decided we just can't keep hoping that these guys are going to get on the park, because injury was the big issue with that lack of continuity. Cockatoo, Lincoln McCarthy, there was a whole host of them, and they were young. So Rowan and Dalhouse, you know, were clearly different. They were. I think the jury was out on Dalhouse's ability to pressure. We had a different view on that, and I think we're seeing a little bit of that already. And Rowan, we didn't bring in to be a 20-possession, 3-goal-a-game player. He's playing a role for us and doing it well. So with a couple of decisions, we've changed the experience mix down there. Look, we don't want to speak too soon because we could have our injury problems, but we've had some cohesion because those guys have trained together for a decent period of time.
Pretty revealing grab we had from Luke Dalhouse the weekend. He won a premiership with the Bulldogs, and he was on a website that Gary Ablett founded, of all things, and he had this to say about his last period of time at the Bulldogs.
I think it was round 18, I actually hurt my ankle, and I was a little bit happy, to be honest, that I was injured because of how much I was struggling. And that was the sign to me on the flight home that I needed to change, because I shouldn't be very happy to get injured.
You got yourself in a bit of a place, haven't you, Scotty, where getting injured's almost a relief. Do you do this sort of research on all that and think we've got a guy that's clearly can play but has had some troubles in recent times as well?
We try. It's difficult, and even the conversations that clubs have with players, it's a bit like interviewing a coach. I mean, you're not really able to come to a conclusion based on a 3-hour interview around how good the coach and how good the person's going to be. And the players tend to give you a little bit of what they think you want to hear. But there was no question that we felt we had a bit of inside information, if you like. Matthew Scarlett coached at the Bulldogs. Luke's a local boy, so we knew people that knew him before he came into the AFL system. I'm really confident in his character. And aside from all the footy stuff, we had pretty good visibility over the fact that he's a pretty bubbly personality, and I don't mind saying publicly, we thought our group needed a little bit of that, and he's come in and certainly not let us down in that respect. You
seem more positive that Tim Kelly will stay next year. Why is that? What's the vibe you're getting there?
I just watch him play. I see him every day, so I have a slightly different perspective on it to everyone else. I see him every day, and he looks to me like he's a 23-year-old having the time of his life. And so the logical extension is, why wouldn't you want to keep doing that? Now, he said publicly he can't predict the future, and I think that's a pretty good line, and it's something that we should embrace too. Let's just enjoy every moment for what it is and cross that bridge when we come to it.
How close did you go to rolling over and taking the West Coast Eagles deal on Tim Kelly last year?
The list management, I was actually in the US, so the list management team who are on the ground, I think were very close.
So was their decision not your decision?
No, it's always a collective decision. In saying that, I had a very strong view on it.
I imagine you'd have a strong view on most things. But did you think the West Coast Eagles were trying to put one over you at the time? Did you think they just thought, OK, we're going to get this bloke because he wants to go home so desperately and his family does?
It would have been an outstanding deal for them.
Yeah.
An absolutely outstanding deal. But the only reason that it was even entertained was that Tim wasn't faking the fact that the only reason he wanted to leave was on compassionate grounds.
Yeah.
And we thought we had an obligation to explore that as much as possible without putting the club at a big disadvantage. And in our opinion, the right outcome was arrived at.
Doug mentioned Charlie Constable wins the NAB Rising Star for round 2, which is a great result. You'll be pretty happy about that. Charlie gets the nod. 31 possession game, only his second game of AFL footy. The winner receives a $20,000 investment portfolio thanks to the team at NAB. Another impressive young player, Scott. He didn't get a game last year with your deep, talented midfield, but that's a good step forward, isn't it?
Yeah, it was a really good performance in those conditions as well. He looked strong over the ball. I think you talked about the numbers. He is 191 centimetres, yeah, and maybe we talked about our small forwards last year, and Lockie Fogarty was taken a round before Charlie in the draft. They're good mates now, the Cats, but some young players profit from the fact that there's a spot for that type of player. Charlie was a bit the opposite. You know, Lockie certainly deserved his spot, but he's an inside midfielder who had a couple of good players in front of him. Well, we thought that we would get him in through the year. And when it didn't pan out that way through the pre-season, we were of the view that we're just going to have to force the issue here a little bit more and not just wait for the chance to open up for him.
So getting him in there, how have Joel Selwood and Gary Ablett embraced their new role?
Oh, well, they've been outstanding. I feel like I'm repeating myself a little bit publicly, but Joel, I expect to have a career best season this year. He's in really good shape. His role is different, but it doesn't preclude him from having big influences on games. And Gary's been outstanding. I think there is some incentive for Gary to really embrace his role. I think every older player, whether you're the best player in the competition or the best player ever, can't play forever unless you embrace a slight change of role. Very few players play the same role all the way through their career.
Can I tell a story? Chris was good enough to let James Brayshaw and I into the coach's box pre-game, a bit of a feel on what was going on. We asked him, how are you managing Gary Ablett? And we walked out of the rooms, Gary Ablett standing there, and Scotty said, how you going, Gaz? He said, when do you get him into the midfield? Without hesitation.
It was a beautiful time.
You mentioned Joel Selwood. You played under one of the great captains of all time in Michael Voss. Where does he compare? How does he compare to Vossi?
Now, well, I don't think there are many people out there that rate Vossi higher than I do, but I think Joel's his equal. Yeah, now they're different people, slightly different players, but I mean, I don't want to be too gushing in praise for Joel. Yeah, that's as high as I can muster at the moment, yeah.
How did you manage to turn Rhys Stanley around? Because there was a stage last year when I recall you saying that you weren't sure who your best ruckman was, who was going to be your ruckman, but it was like the latter part of last season, the penny dropped for him, and the early part of this year, he's continued on from where he was last year as well. So how did that come about?
We've got a couple of coaches in particular that work really closely with him, with Rhys and our ruckman in general. Nigel Lappin's the shortest ruck coach in the competition, and he has a close relationship and he's done some really good work. Rhys is not the player that he will end up. There's a lot of untapped potential with Rhys. We're really optimistic with him. And I think last year we had 3 or 4 guys who were all going OK without being terrible. And I think we went through a patch where the team wasn't playing that well and the finger was pointed at them, a little unfairly, in my view. And then Rhys played some really good footy. In fact, going into the final series, we thought Rhys was a real asset for us and we lost him for that first final. It made it a bit harder for us going up against Gawn. But one thing about Rhys is he's feet are on the ground. So he had a pretty good game against Collingwood round 1 and Grundy. I thought that was about 50-50 that game. Now, he got beaten by Gawn on the weekend, so he knows that, but Gawn is probably the best ruckman in the comp, so those things sort of happen. So I think the trend is is looking good for Reece. But yeah, he's not the finished product yet.
Jackie Felgate's a very passionate Cats fan, as you know. Chris, she's been following social media with a couple of questions. Over to you, Jackie.
Yeah, we've had a huge response, Chris, to ask you. And Edmund59 has asked us, will the short turnaround this week affect the retention of those younger players that you were talking about earlier?
It is actually something that we spend a bit of time on over the pre-season. The fixture comes out in October, whenever it is, and that was obviously there was an asterisk around this round. We didn't expect to be playing 4 debutants in round 1, so we've thought long and hard about them. Jack Henry had hamstring tightness. It's unlikely we'd take a guy with hamstring tightness into a 5-day break, but other than that, our guys have pulled up really well, and there's been a lot of planning go into this preparation. So actually, I did listen to Wayne's commentary on the weekend, and he's right. Players don't mind short breaks because the training is adjusted accordingly.
It's all recovery, isn't it?
Yeah.
And sometimes when you have the longer break, well, you get 2 or 3 main sessions in for that longer break, and the players would prefer to be recovering and playing. We all love playing more than training.
Exactly, yeah. Training's a very, very poor cousin to playing.
And Jai on Facebook has asked us, who do you tag in Adelaide's midfield on Thursday night?
Oh, Sloane, Crouch, Batu, and Gibbs. Atkins on the wing. There's a few of them. I think the modern game makes it very, very difficult to go after them all, if any of them. And we saw Collingwood round 1 leave Levi Greenwood out, who you know, has a pretty good record on Joel Selwood, which speaks to sort of how difficult it is when you've got a deep midfield like Collingwood's to fit them all in. So I don't mind saying that, you know, the template has been where you sit on Sloane, but Brad Crouch coming back and Gibbs in there makes it a bit more complicated.
Congratulations on a great start to the year. It's a long season, but 2 wins and a big game coming up. Congratulations to Chris Scott. Thanks for joining us on Talking Footy.
Pleasure, thank you.
And a big game coming up, as Jackie said, Thursday night footy is a couple of days away. It is the Adelaide Crows at home to Chris Scott's Cats. You can catch it all on the channels of 7.